Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. This is a new presentation from www.central-mosque.com and the Humble Heart YouTube channel. The topic today is Imran Khan and Madina Masjid demolition issue. This masjid, known as Madina Masjid, is located in the Tariq Road area of Karachi, and recently the Supreme Court of Pakistan ordered this mosque to be demolished because apparently this land was designated as a public park and it was not properly acquired in the 90s or late 80s, early 90s, and the process was not transparent and legal. Therefore, the structure needs to be demolished, and this area they've ordered to be converted into a public park. This has caused quite widespread unease in Pakistan, in both the religious and the secular circles, because from a religious point of view, this is a masjid which has operated and existed for over 25 years, frequented by people. And from a secular point of view, what they're saying is it doesn't matter what the structure is, it has been built on land which has been illegally acquired. I'm going to address many of these issues in this presentation, but when it comes to Pakistan, the buck stops with the Prime Minister. The issue is related to the Supreme Court. So the Ministry of Law and Justice are run under this guy, who's the Minister of Law and Justice, and the Ministry of Religious Affairs, who's run by under him. They both report to the Prime Minister. The Parliament of Pakistan, the Prime Minister is responsible and de facto leader of the Parliament of Pakistan. Therefore, he needs to personally take this issue in hand and file a review of the Supreme Court decision and order an investigation as to how this mosque was allowed to be built in the 1990s. The mosque administration saying that they've been paying taxes and bills all this time. So there are two simultaneous pieces of two simultaneous steps that need to be taken: the review and the investigation, and that needs to happen directly from ultimately from the Prime Minister, undertaken by the relevant bodies. Now, let's take a look at what the Islamic Sharia says about these matters. If a mosque has been built on private usurped land, then that mosque needs to be demolished. The evidence comes directly from the life of our beloved Prophet, peace be upon him, that when he migrated to Medina, we know the incident when the Prophet ﷺ's she-camel actually stopped at the exact location where Masjid al-Nabawi, the blessed Masjid al-Nabawi, is located. This land belonged to two orphan boys, Sahal and Suhail radiallahu anhum, and they wanted to give this land, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said no. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not take this as a gift and insisted on buying it from them, and then he built the mosque there. So if it's on a private usurped land, this mosque or any mosque is not allowed to exist. Number two, if a mosque encroaches on public a highway, a thoroughfare, or a road public access, and the mosque restricts it, then that section of the mosque at least needs to be demolished and that public access needs to be restored. When it comes to Madina Masjid, this masjid in question, these two clauses do not apply. The land which it is built on was not privately owned and it does not curtail any access. Here's a short history about this mosque. In the 1980s, there existed a temporary mosque at this location. In 1990, that temporary structure was registered with the provincial government of Pakistan as a religious place of worship. In 1994, what the people wanted to do is build a solid structure in place of the temporary mosque. That permission was granted by the provincial government of Pakistan. So as far as people are concerned, they did nothing wrong. They applied for a permit. The permit was granted. They built a structure in 1994. In 1997, this mosque was affiliated with Jamiatul Ulum al-Islamiyya bin Nouri Town, Karachi. When it comes to this particular mosque, the committee and those in charge saying that they have bills and receipts of taxes and everything else that they've been paying and the permits going back into the 1990s. So people are saying we did nothing wrong. The neighborhood has been praying at this masjid, praying their 5 times daily salah, praying their Jummah, praying their Taraweeh, praying the Eid salah, everything since 1990 in this structure and going back into the 80s at the temporary structure which existed at this place. Supreme Court of Pakistan arbitrarily on a technicality made a decision for this structure to be demolished and converted into a public park. This is a history of this incident. Now, what is the ordinance? Uh, are there any provisions in the Constitution of Pakistan or in the law of Pakistan or in the local ordinance of Karachi? This area legally is really vague in Pakistan. What it does say is all residential areas in Pakistan must have open access for people. And then it says that open access for people can be converted to parks, squares, markets, or places of worship. There are neighborhoods in Pakistan where there are non Muslim residents, and of course, they can choose to build a place of worship of their choice and not necessarily a mosque. So, this area where the mosque stands today was open access for people, it was not owned by someone private. The open access, then the neighborhood and the people have the right to vote and to have some say as to what they want to use that open access for. They can choose to have a park there, they can have anything else. In this particular location, for over 25 years, this solid structure has stood. There is a masjid and a maktab for children, and that's what the neighborhood people have used. People of this neighborhood, in fact, if I would say 100%, and if not 100%, overwhelming majority want the mosque to continue because that is their local mosque. The Supreme Court did not consult the neighborhood or the people at all. They simply looked at this case historically and said this was designated as an open space, therefore it must go back to an open space or open access for people. Now, what is the Islamic ruling in that issue? People need to clearly understand the Islamic ruling here as to what is going on. There's no such thing as government land. The land belongs to people. Open access belongs to people. And people get to dictate what they want to do here. So over 25 years, the neighborhood people and the people who live in the area are quite satisfied with this being a mosque. They've continued to use it as a mosque, and they're happy for this to continue as a mosque. So this mosque cannot be demolished at all. It is not. This land was not taken from someone's property. It does not curtail public access or anything like that. So this cannot be demolished. It needs to continue. However, a thorough investigation needs to take place as to who granted permission at this particular location for this structure to be built, because people applied for access, they were granted permission, and then they built it. Third, the law and the local ordinances in Pakistan need to be tightened up to allow spaces for mosques. Unfortunately, this is an area where Pakistan needs to make some progress. In other Muslim countries, the government gives land dedicated to the mosque. There's no such thing in Pakistan. So for each new neighborhoods, each suburbs, developments, the government needs to allocate space for mosques and not just leave it as an open-ended, open access space. Fourthly, the scholars have said, okay, 25 years ago, people applied for a permit, somebody granted them permit, they didn't know what was going on. We now know that this was designated as an open space. So what Muslims should do, not only just for this neighborhood, but people in Pakistan, imagine that this land is worth $100,000. So what people need to do is they need to collect that $100,000 and simply pay it back into the treasury of Pakistan. So saying, look, this mosque was built on an area which was open access land. Here, this land is worth whatever, $100,000, $200,000, whatever, deposit it back into the Pakistani treasury, and that's the end of it. The mosque itself cannot be demolished because it is not on someone's private land at all. A similar tweet was done with Shaykh al-Islam Mufti Taqi Usmani, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, and he basically said that the Madina Masjid of Tariq Road, the decision of the Supreme Court to demolish it and build a park is without reason. This masjid has existed for over 25 years and has been frequented by musallis and people who come to pray there. And for the Supreme Court to arbitrarily make a decision without listening to the neighborhood and the people who live there on a technicality cannot be reasoned with. And the Supreme Court itself should review this decision. This is what Shaykh al-Islam Mufti Taqi Usmani Hafizullah Ta'ala said on a tweet a couple of days ago. Now, this slide is the next two slides. In fact, this one and the next one is addressing the issues of the secular and the liberal peoples in Pakistan. They say by the way, without any evidence that this is common practice in Pakistan. What people do is go and claim land and they build businesses and shops, and in the end, they build a small masjid. As I've pointed out, the land which is privately owned cannot be usurped. You cannot have a masjid there at all. Imagine if there is a hypothetical scenario where there is government land and people usurp it and build a mosque. Then that mosque is sacred, not the businesses, not the shops, not the shopping centers, not the offices. So they can all be demolished. The mosque is sacred, not the businesses. What we need to do is we need to find out how is it possible. This is not happening, by the way. This is a figment of people's imagination as to how is it possible for construction overnight to happen and people to have plazas and shopping centers and offices overnight. What kind of authorities are allowing this to happen? How is this construction even allowed? It should be stopped right there. The next is the masjid is waqf. Masjid is not for business. It's a dedicated, it belongs for the benefit of Muslims or belongs to the benefit of the ummah. Therefore, the waqf provisions in the constitution of Pakistan should be legally codified more stringently. And the masjid and the madrasas and everything else should not be used for any benefit or any profit. And that should be legally enshrined in the law whatsoever. So that is what needs to happen from a legal point of view. Now, the last thing what people are saying that if this mosque is allowed to continue, that it sets a legal precedence. It kind of does not. What we need to do is we need to learn lessons from this incident. Number one, as I've already talked about, there needs to be provisions in the law of Pakistan and local ordinances that spaces need to be allowed for mosques. So new neighborhoods, new suburbs, whenever they sprung up, there needs to be adequate spaces, not just open access, but dedicated for the masjids. This is where Pakistan has been constantly failing for the last 70 years. New neighborhoods do not allow spaces for masjids. Number two, the permit procedure needs to be transparent. Somebody granted a permit to build a structure where this mosque stands today. How that should be the government's responsibility to review that process and to find out who allowed it. As simple as that. And third, as I talked about, the waqf provision needs to happen in the constitution of Pakistan. It should be the accounts of the masjid should be public, should be transparent, and no profit should be allowed to take place. Number four, if mosques are indeed build somewhere on private encroached lands, as the secular and the liberals of Pakistan are saying, then those mosques should be reclaimed and the land given back to the private owners of that land. It's as simple as that. There's no space in Islamic Sharia on usurping land which belongs to someone else, on oppression. You cannot have a mosque there, as simple as that. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.